Hi, this is Sandy Sims with SDS Digital and the Accord Sequarallel. Today we're going to have a look at the envelope feature. Each song project can have up to 4 envelopes to output on jacks CC1 to CC6, as well as control a Midi CC, pitch bend, or aftertouch parameter. The envelope quick box acts as a drop-down to select envelope type: ADSR, draw by recording a CV input, or parametric settings. Holding on the envelope quick box will access envelope parameters and direct send options. The envelopes are shown graphically to select one for editing. Here a trigger source is chosen from CC5 input: bars, beat, clock, a Midi channel's notes, a particular drum, or free running. Because we're not playing yet, let's start with clock as a trigger. Envelope size is in beats and ticks from 1 tick to 8 beats, or 2 bars. The actual length of the envelope depends on the incoming clock rate, so will always act the same way, regardless of the BPM. Next, select a direct CV output. An output must be active, as this is the primary function, in order for a Midi output to be valid. The clock is faster than the envelope, so it never finishes, as it's being reset to start on every clock. It would need to be set to 100 to complete, or less. This is an ADSR envelope, so let's select ADSR to edit. Selecting poles can move a pole to a desired position, so let's shorten the attack. Click on Poles to select a pole, then click to move it. The waveform is updated after click to confirm, as you can see on the scope display. This is actually an AHDSR: attack, hold, decay, sustain, and release. Clicking on curve allows selection of a curve, then to edit that curve. The sustain pole is a double setting, first to adjust the position of the pole, then to adjust the height, noted by the quote in front of the S when clicked. Editing the sustain is slightly different than usual in that the decay doesn't flow into it, but rather is a separate point, so a shelf can be more defined. The delay and sustain poles can be brought together to remove the shelf, like this. So let's hit play to continue. The next type of envelope is CV draw. This records whatever is coming into the CC5 jack, then captures it as an envelope. I have a CC5 patched to a RITEM's gate output, so it's 0 to about 4.5 volts, purely pulses. Now over to a multiplexed LFO. The recording scan rate can be slowed by scrolling right, clockwise, or sped up by scrolling left. The LFO is dual, so one is offsetting the other, which is why the sine waves are moving down slowly. The last full-width screen completion is captured, which helps to grab the one you want when the sample rate is slower. I'll change the CC5 input to the output of the VCO we can hear right now. This needs extreme scrolling to the left to speed it up. In this case, the audio input is kind of hit and miss because the scan rate is so fast. Each capture is applied immediately, but we can't hear any changes because the envelope is not yet assigned to a jack. So let's do that. Selecting envelope 2. I'll set the trigger source to notes on channel 1, which is, I think, where the notes we're hearing are on. and the jack to send to will be CC2. I like to match the envelope number with the CC jack number. Well, initially. It makes things easier to remember. So envelope 2 goes directly to jack CC2. The yellow LEDs reflect the activity on the CC jacks. For the sake of clarity, the VCO's PWM offset is multed from the scope being displayed right now. Shortening the envelope length resembles noise almost. I'll set it to 19 ticks. Let's resample that audio input to get a different waveform for envelope 2. Back into CV Draw. Envelope 2. By the way, the trim button here will find an equal crossing point so the envelope can be used with a free run to mimic an LFO with no sharp transitions. There's an interesting one. Because some notes are retriggering the envelope before it can reach those spikes, the spikes are only seen during the rest periods, longer than 19 ticks. Okay, enough of that. I'll reacquire a sample from the LFO. Slightly ramping. That sounds better. The last envelope method is the Parametric Creation. This will be for envelope 3. Changing the parameters to define the envelope might give you the shape you want. You can adjust the frequency of the sine wave, ramp the frequency up or down, adjust the amplitude, and also ramp that. Adjust the voltage offset. And ramp that as well. We'll come back to this in a moment. Let's patch into CC3 jack. Envelope 3. Let's trigger it on every bar. Because the envelope size is 4 beats, it perfectly fits into a bar so we can see it all on the scope. Once assigned to a jack, a Midi CC, pitch bend, or aftertouch can be sent on the set channels. I'm setting the Midi cut filter so we'll hear the change on the Midi. One must bear in mind when adding this for multiple Midi channels that the bandwidth gets loaded up quite a bit. But the Sequarallel's Midi engine will begin to reduce the update rate if the ports start to reach their limits. This isn't really that noticeable as most Midi synths smooth the processing anyway. So back to the envelope's parameters. It's pretty intuitive really. Raise the voltage offset. Increase the frequency ramp. The wave step quantizes the sample steps time-wise. See, the Midi synth is smoothing this, but you can hear the difference on the VCO. If it's only being used for Midi though, this steppiness will reduce the bandwidth drastically. Mix Mult takes a sine wave based on a set frequency multiplied by this value and allows mixing of it with the original, which makes this a complex waveform. Wave Fuzz just puts random hair on the waveform, dirtying it up a bit. Bipolar turned off here simply chops off any negative side to the waveform. With this, the Midi CC is reinterpolated from the 0 volt point rather than over the whole negative to positive range. Trim LFO tries to find an equal crossing point between the start and end, so this wave could be used as an LFO smoothly. But because this wave is so ramped and the start phase is so high, there isn't much to work with here. Changing the phase of the start further down would remedy this, but we're using this as triggered, so we'll just leave it alone. So that was the direct envelope settings, which is simple enough. But CV mode settings also play a big part in how the envelopes present to the jacks. CV mode is for jack control after all. Jack CV3's source is Midi channel 1, so that CV row is already outputting notes, even though there's no VCO patch to that row. It is important for velocity sources to have that set, but CC3 jack has all of the settings for other things, like envelopes. You can reduce the amplitude of any envelopes assigned to this jack, CC3. You may have noticed thin spikes on the oscilloscope display. This is from gate CV row's velocity also getting sent to this jack. To prove that, I'll turn off the velocity. Any other function can also be dialed into this jack, even though the direct envelope 3 is targeted here. One will override the other depending on if the previous one is finished. This can make very complex envelopes. Bipolar setting here affects the jack, but turned off will only output the upper half to any Midi CC driven from the envelope as well. If reset is turned off, then the source here will only trigger a new envelope once the previous one is completed. The envelope rate in CV mode simply chops every X number of samples from the stream, so this isn't accurate like the rate setting in the envelope quick box. It's a quick fix. Interestingly, direct envelopes can share a smooth Midi to CV conversion as well, so can act as a CV takeover while the knob isn't being moved, but will fight each other if both change at the same time. So changing the CV mode function for this jack to envelope 3 with velocity attenuation will play envelope 3 direct as triggered there each bar, plus envelope 3 velocity attenuated triggered by notes here. Back to envelope 2. In envelope 2 settings, removing the trigger source here makes no difference on jack 3, as jack 3 is simply grabbing this envelope's waveform to use there. Envelope 2's rate is used though. Assigned Midi CC74 doesn't follow what the scope is showing because the direct destination is CC2 jack and it's getting triggered from here by channel 1's notes. As I mentioned, the envelope can also control pitch bend and channel aftertouch assignment if that's your thing. I hope you can figure that one out. It can be a bit convoluted, which is why I mentioned starting out with envelope number equaling jack numbers. The last part of the envelope quick box dropdown is the copy function. Select the envelope you want to copy to, envelope 4 here. Here you can copy an envelope from any other song project, which can be handy. The envelope can then be modified, but the type must be the same. The waveform graphic is indicative of what type it is. These are ADSR types. And this is a CV draw type. So the settings for envelope 4 can be made to suit this project. I'll change the scope over to CC4 jack. CC4 jack from CV mode is sending triggers on every beat right now, but the two can use the same jack. So back to jack 1, which is our original ADSR envelope. The velocity of notes attenuates the envelope when vel ENV is selected, but these notes from the tracks tracker aren't changing very much in velocity, so it's hardly noticeable on the scope. Here's envelope 3. And envelope 4. Over on envelope 2, the notes are triggering to provide almost constant changes to the jack. If the envelope trigger is set to free run, then it only takes effect when the play button is pressed or a new play starts. From then on, the envelope will continue cycling, even when it's stopped. I hope you have enjoyed this little tutorial on the envelope generators of the Sequarallel and find these features useful in your compositions. Thanks for watching. I'm Sandy Sims. Keep on touching!